Awesome. Well, I think we are ready-ish to get started, get rolling. So just as people are logging on to the LinkedIn, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us during this Lunch and Learn style just webinar where we're just going to catch up on the latest happenings at Prospector and within the mining industry. You can comment in the LinkedIn comments. We'll be able to see those. There's a little bit of a time delay. So if you have any questions or insights or things you want to share, just go ahead and comment and we'll be able to respond. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, I guess, do we want to do some team introductions here first? Emily, you want to start?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Emily King. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Prospector, and I'm a geologist by background.
Hi, I'm John. I'm our COO and CTO.
I'm Titiana. I'm head of data science.
And I'm Alessandra. I am the head of data. I have a business and finance background with a few years of experience in the mining industry.
Awesome. And I'm Jess. I'm the head of new media, and I am also a geologist. Lots of rock lickers around.
It's never a bad thing.
And if you don't, you are not a geologist.
Right. That's the key to being a true geologist is the look test.
Right.
Cool. With that, should we dive in? I know we had some really cool stuff to talk about today, so I'm excited.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, so we thought a really cool thing to talk about today would be we've been getting some really interesting inquiries into Prospector's data set on like leadership demographics for mining companies of all sizes and things like compensation statistics for those leadership groups. And I think that's probably not something that folks oftentimes think about as a data set that we have inside of Prospector. But because we cover such a wide variety of public filing documents within the mining industry, we do get a lot of data on people who are leading companies, whether that's in kind of the executive level of management or at the board level, and lots of statistics about their backgrounds, their demographics, and compensation. So we thought this might be an interesting topic because we do have an exciting day coming up next month. Jess, do you want to talk about our big reveal of the day we were chatting about on social media?
Yeah. So next month on June 15th is the International Day of Women in Mining. And if you follow IWIM or any of the WIM chapters, you've probably seen this. So we thought this would be a really cool introduction to let everybody know that that's coming up next month, but also kind of discuss women in mining. And we have a ton of fun stuff planned at Prospector for that whole week. So be sure to stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and I think as we chat a little about this topic today, one thing that always frustrates me when we're talking about like ESG type issues or kind of diversity, D&I, diversity and inclusion issues, is it's always hard to improve what you can't measure, right? That was like always rule number one when John and I both started our careers at IBM. And if you were trying to improve a process or anything, you had to be able to measure where you were in order to know if you'd achieved at where you wanted to end up. So I think this is somewhere that public disclosure data can really give us a good picture of the reality of where we are on a lot of these points. And it's data, and it's public data. It's not feely statements, right? It's not about warm and fuzzy. It's just what are the numbers tell us. So John, I think you had the spreadsheet kind of ready to share, or I can share some highlights.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe what I'll do is I'll kind of share some stuff direct, just high level stuff, Emily, and I think you've done a lot of like really more specific areas.
Yeah.
Just to give folks a sense of the data that we do have. So this is directly inside of our database, and just at a high level, looking at what's the breakdown of percent female. I think Emily will dive into this a bit more, but the net is about a little more than 12.5% of all directors or board involved individuals or C-level executives across mining companies that are publicly traded. And there's about 12.5% of them are female versus male. So it's kind of interesting. And so what we do have is for every single person out there, we do have their title. If they're an executive or a board member, we have their age, we have their gender, we have little biography on them, where they've worked before, and their titles. So it allows us to kind of, one, do kind of little roll-ups like this, but then look at, what are the titles that are out there? Like what do we see? What's the breakdown of certain roles within companies? So if you look at, say, something like CEO, right, it's the percentage is actually more like 7.28 of all individuals out there are female versus male. But what's interesting is that for like the secretary position on the board, it's 42.5%. So it's a little intriguing as you start getting into, some of the what position do women versus men hold in the companies, and we can even look at overall compensation and the differences amongst it. So Emily, I know you have some very detailed breakdowns as well, so I'll let you kind of show some of that. But this is looking directly into our database.
No, and that's where I think, like, when we start to look at that by market cap, the differences also become much more clear, right? So as an example, 61% of the total female leaders in the mining space, so 61% of women who are on a board or in executive management, are working at companies that their market cap is over $1 billion, right? I mean, it's heavily concentrated within big companies, and that pool gets much smaller. So only 10% of female leaders within the mining industry are working at companies or on the board of companies that are $50 million and below in terms of market cap. So it's certainly the case, I think, and it makes sense for a lot of folks. If you've been paying attention to these discussions over the last several years, the big companies are trying to set goals for diversity and inclusion of a bunch of different underrepresented groups, and it's taking a while for that to maybe come down to the smaller company level. It also validates a frustration that I oftentimes hear from the executives of the smaller companies that are trying to achieve diversity goals, where they're saying it's really hard to compete with a big company, right? If I'm trying to convince a certain really qualified woman to join our executive team or our board, I can't compete with these massive companies and the packages that they can offer. So I think that's an interesting statistic. I do think, though, when you look at market cap, the percentage of women in the leadership of each of those different ranges is not that dramatic. Like, it's 21% at the $1 billion plus level, and it's 17 to 19% for $1 billion down to 50 million, and then it's 14% for 20 million and below, right? So the percentage in those companies that have female representation is kind of around the same at all levels, but there's just so much larger pool within the bigger companies. I also think it's interesting when we look at age representation within the industry. So there's a lot of talk, certainly on our podcast and our Nugget newsletter and all of our social media, about attracting the next generation into mining. We used about 41,000 people data points for the age analysis, because those are the number of folks that we had age 4. And of those, only 1,600 were below the age of 40. Right. So a very small number of people in the kind of 20 to 40-year-old age range who are kind of coming up in the industry. That balloons to in the 40 to 60-year age range, that goes up to over 20,000. And then there are another 20,000 in the 60 to 80-year range. Surprisingly, there are also 1,100 people in the 80 to 100-year-old range. So there are almost as many people older than 80 in mining company leadership roles as there are people younger than 40. So certainly there's a lot of expertise at that level. But again, if the industry is trying to attract a younger generation to come into the workforce, representation is just as important when it comes to age demographics as it is other represented groups. So I think that's something the industry may want to keep in the back of their minds. So
those are great insights.
Highlight.
So when we're looking at this data, I don't think any of it's a surprise to any of us, right? Like, I think that's kind of what the industry's been expecting. I know we've seen McKinsey last year put out a great report on like why women are leaving the mining industry, and then there was another recent one So we're seeing a lot of articles, and so I'd love to hear from everybody maybe why these demographics are important, because we're touching on that they are important, but what are the reasons here why diversity of the age demographics and the different representation demographics are important?
Okay, I can continue. Sorry,
Yeah.
because that's something I learned from my time working women in mining. I think there are two things to consider. First, these statistics change as we change country or level of development of each country. For example, right now, in general terms, in Peru, the representation of women in the mining industry is about 7%, and it have increased only about 0.5 percentage points from one year to another one. And the other thing is that I'm not sure if this happens in other countries, is that they teach young girls or young women that they can't work on science. So they think that their capacities are only for developing in careers that are different than science. So, and that happens in all, in I guess, in all the different socioeconomic levels, that they just think that they can't go into science. And right now I'm working with women in mining in Peru on a program to try to incentive the women to get more involved into science implying that includes data science as well as mining or geology, because that representation is very low. I remember taking courses on mining, a lot of specializations in the past, in which of a class of 50 people studying a topic about mining, I was the only woman, or we were only one or two persons working, specializing in mining. So that's something that I would like to comment. And also, I remember that last year it was a survey in Canada, and mining, I don't know why, it was on the least preferred careers for women studying. They prefer to, if they study science, to be focusing on other in other departments. Although Canada, we know, is very important into mining.
Yeah, and I would say even for folks who may have like a different perspective on whether diversity and inclusion is important in and of itself, right? I think there are maybe differences of opinion regarding that point within the industry and society at large, right? But in general, the mining industry is facing a huge labor shortage and talent shortage. And I think, you know, including and really talking about how we can have greater representation from groups that aren't, you know, proportionally represented within the industry is a huge market for us to be able to pull in really talented folks to the industry. So even if it's just from a completely self-serving, like where are all of our mining people going to come from, I think understanding the data points and how we message things and encourage folks to want to come work in the industry is important. I would say also, I won't dive into the details because it's a lot of detail, but there are also really interesting trends in like diversity of leadership with certain minerals and commodities, which I find really interesting. And I don't know the reason why, but certain metal, like companies that have certain types of metal or mineral deposits appear to have much larger representation of female leadership, which I find interesting, gold in particular, and then copper. And also looking at where leadership is based, it makes a lot of sense. Actually, copper has a larger representation with projects in Latin America. You know, so looking at where leaders are based outside of a headquarters location is also something I think people should pay attention to, is leadership coming up from where projects are being run, right? As opposed to just top down from where a company might be listed or headquartered is another really important data point.
Yeah, those are all really interesting. It's crazy how that data can be pulled from Prospector.
Yeah, we can tell you by name, by name, every single, like there are only like, it's very small groups of leadership within certain commodity focuses that they don't have their email addresses, but we can probably Google them too if you wanted to find them. But yeah, it's a lot of information, including also universities. Sorry, it's really fascinating. Like the top 3 universities for female leadership within the mining industry are all in Canada. I should give them a shout out. University of British Columbia, Queen's University, and University of Toronto is pretty much the largest concentration of female leadership within the entire mining industry, and the same 3 for smaller companies as well.
I just was going to show really quickly for all those wondering where to find this on Prospector. So if you're looking for board members and executives, if you go to a company profile here on Prospector and you scroll down to the board members and executives section, you can actually learn more about the different board members and executives from there. So just a heads up on that.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really cool tool where a lot of investors in particular, they might get to a specific project that they're interested in, and then they start to look at the company to see whether the company that owns that project is one they want to put money into, and management is such a key criteria with making investment decisions. So the ability to dive in deeper and drill down and see where else the management team or the board has worked, what kind of other projects have they overseen, do they have a variety of roles at one time, or are they singularly focused on that corporation? Those are all things that you can understand by looking at that data on Prospector.
That's awesome. We do have a question from the audience from Dina or Dinah. Do you think the diversity in leadership is getting better with time, or do you think it's getting increasingly difficult to promote female leadership in mining? Would you expect parity in 50 years, 100 years from now?
I would say I do think it's getting better with time. And I think even if you look at the age distribution of female leadership within the industry, there's such a higher representation within the 40 to 60 year age range, right? That you're seeing leadership at that level. I do think that with larger changes in terms of younger generations and the type of work they want to do and the types of companies they want to work with, I think the ability to attract the younger generation into mining in and of itself will pose a very large problem for improving female diversity in mining. So I think we've got to really look at the pulling in the new generation as a whole, and the changes that need to be made in order to do that. And that will also really positively impact female leadership. And parity, I honestly don't know. The only one that I know who's made a firm commitment, the only company, is BHP. I know they made a commitment for 50-50 by, I think, 2025, if I'm correct. There may be other companies out there that have made similar commitments. I think that will be a real challenge, and I think companies that make those commitments are going to have to really headhunt women out of other companies in order to meet those numbers, because the pipeline is just not there. But I also think increasing the amount of technology that's used within the mining industry will attract a lot of women and will create the types of jobs that perhaps will help to address some of the obstacles that women have faced.
Great insights. Yeah, I was just looking at the McKinsey report again, and they're expecting 42% undecided and 3% that are leaving. 56% of them expect to stay within the industry, and then as they move up, that percentage increases. But I think recruiting and keeping people in those first few years is definitely crucial for meeting those goals.
Yeah, because we're also going to have to do a lot more mining in the next 2 decades, right, to meet all these wonderful targets we have for low carbon economy and the green transition. So to build even more mines and discover more deposits than we already have, we're going to need a much larger workforce.
Yeah, and as we're talking about workforce and technology and everything, so you had mentioned, Emily, that technology and the way we do mining is changing and could help in recruiting more people. What kind of things are we looking for, coming to the industry? I know for me, autonomous stuff is really cool. I think that's a great idea for safety as well as efficiency. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about. Rest of the team, what are you guys most excited about to see in the future of mining?
I think that more technology, which is a trend that we are seeing right now. Actually, I'm writing an article about other ways in which artificial intelligence or machine learning can support mining, So there's definitely much more than what we are progressing right now. We can do capital management. We can even manage our costs and try to find efficiencies using machine learning. The same for identifying trends in the long run of copper prices or gold prices. So there's much more that I want to see in the future. I want to see these projects or these initiatives to be growing up in the future, and of course that will bring, as we were saying, also improvements in the operational sides in terms of efficiency and most of it safety and more careful respect to the environment. So that will be great.
I'm similar to a lot of Alessandra's points. I'm really excited about some of the technology that's coming out that helps to do different kinds of environmental mitigation, right? So lower the impact of mining and also make like mineral processing more energy efficient and therefore more environmentally friendly. I think that's a big gap, right? The actual processing side and the mills and the carbon footprint associated with that. As a super nerd, I'm really excited to watch things like how we develop space mining and potentially deep sea mining, and how the technology from those really future forward things can be applied to the terrestrial mining industry, kind of the standard one. And I'm really along the lines of the automation, Jess. I think the more technology we can have on site that allows for a healthier work-life balance for the workforce. So, like, how can technology allow people to have more like friendly shift schedules and, like work schedules and fly in, fly out type situations? Like, how can technology make those types of mining specific work-life balance issues more balanced or easier to navigate,
Tatiana, John, any insights? Any things you're excited about?
I mean, I think for myself, I'm just sort of looking at a future where there's more of a general public awareness, and that technology kind of makes this easier for everyone to understand and participate in, because I think the lack of participation often results in lack of engagement, and lack of engagement can result in unintended consequences for groups that are previously not engaged in the process, right? So I look forward to a future where we're all kind of aware of what's going on, right? And I think technology makes that apparent, right? So the average person knows, right? Like, and that we're not working from myth, but working from fact, right? I think that's the kind of future that I'm hoping for as we continue to progress.
And, on my side, you've mentioned everything that I was thinking about already. So, but I think maybe a little bit more details on what technology can give us. I think for me, it would be really exciting to see that the mining efficiency is increased, and we know much better where the mining would be worthwhile. So that less resources are spent into prospecting and trying to find the new site for the mining. So maybe it is a little bit science fiction idea, but I hope that as we collect more and more information, like we do in our prospector platform, we can try to guess more and more about our environment from just the data that we have, and without creating some damage in, deforestation or digging holes where they're not necessary, and so on.
No, that's great insights, Tatiana, and perfect. Yeah, we have a question from Rahul. What role do you see Earth observation and geospatial imagery could play in the Prospector platform?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about the potential for the inclusion of that, maybe in the not so distant future, because I think some of the really cool power behind prospectors' data is extracting data and information, really valuable information, out of text documents that don't get a lot of attention within the mining industry sometimes, and powering that with geospatial information that really helps to highlight what's going on in a location would be very powerful. I think we even see that it's critical in telling the story of a project and a company. And I'll just give a little shout out. One of our partners, Verify, had a big announcement that we shared about their Series A this week. They're one really good example of how you can use different types of geospatial imagery to tell the story of a project and what a company is doing in a location. And I think that's kind of where we're looking at in the next stage. Then there's the whole predictive analytics side of like incorporating geophysics and geology data and kind of predicting where there may be more deposits or where a company should drill. And that's also really exciting, but maybe not something that we could physically build into the existing platform yet, but at least highlighting the geospatial imagery and the story around that and how it maps to disclosure documents, I think is coming soon. John, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think it's got a huge advantage, right? And I think that the thing that I'm most interested in is looking at, how do we get to a point of where tenement systems are understood globally, right? I think this is something where Canada and Australia do a pretty good job of it. I think there's some other jurisdictions that do as well. But getting a kind of a centralized place so everyone can look through the tenements and really understand what's out there, what's unclaimed, what is claimed, what's the status of the claim, what's everything tied to it, along with all the ownership stuff that we typically track. Those are the kind of things that are, I think, really helpful and informative, right? We place a project on a point in the map, right? But sometimes that point, the size of what that point represents can vary greatly depending on where the project is, the type of tenement that it's tied to. So I think some things like that are also exciting. And with the geospatial stuff, I think it really helps provide that picture of understanding progress, right? Like what's happening at the mine site, if something is going through progress stages, like how does that stuff manifest itself, and how can someone understand what's happening? So I think there's a huge place for it. It's something we're definitely looking for ways to integrate with other systems, bring more data in that can complement what we have and allow users to kind of play around in their own little sandbox.
Awesome. Great insights all. So we've been running for about 30 minutes. Do you have any final insights, information, shout outs, anything you all want to do?
No, I would just thank everybody for joining. And if you're not already, make sure you're subscribing to the Nugget and listening to On the Rocks, where we talk about a lot of these topics. And stay tuned for June, limited mining.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all again for joining. And we will see you at the end of every month for more roundups like this. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.